The other afternoon, I found myself mesmerized by a video of a woman I'd never met, baking sourdough in a kitchen that looked like it had been dipped in liquid gold. There was no shouting, no frantic jump cuts, just the rhythmic kneading of dough and a voice that was almost unnervingly gentle. It felt like stumbling into a sanctuary, a Tradwife oasis in the middle of a digital desert of high-decibel outrage. My first thought wasn't about politics or gender roles, it was simply, this feels safe. But as I watched, I started noticing the details. Not the flour on her hands, but the reflection of a professional-grade softbox in a polished copper pot. I realized that every natural stray hair and every humble linen fold was a pixel-perfect execution of a very specific visual code. What looked like a rejection of the modern world was, in fact, one of the most sophisticated pieces of modern marketing I've ever seen. We are told this is a traditional revival, a heartfelt return to the family hearth, and a rejection of radical left paradigms. But if you look at the cold, hard logic of the sexual marketplace, it looks a lot less like a spiritual awakening and a lot more like aesthetic arbitrage. It's a strategic pivot, a calculated rate cut in the price of virtue because the old market of deconstruction has finally reached a point of malignant deflation. This isn't just about women wanting to stay home, it's about a high-stakes game of aesthetic hacking. These influencers aren't just baking bread, they are broadcasting a digital helpmate signal designed to bypass your neocortical defenses and trigger subcortical templates for genetic fitness and resource security. It's a hack into the male perceptual system, wrapped in soft fabrics and domestic silence. Why is this traditional revival exploding in late 2025? And why is your brain so easily captured by a high-definition filter simulating natural light? Are we witnessing a genuine civilizational correction, or are we just watching the most sophisticated camouflage ever deployed in the history of human mating strategies? To understand what's really happening, we have to look past the sourdough and into the immoral mechanics of the biological loop.
That's such a powerful starting image. And it perfectly captures what our sources are calling the aesthetic pivot.
The aesthetic pivot.
Yeah, it's really the ultimate expression of how these huge macroeconomic forces and just, psychological fatigue, how they translate directly into culture, into aesthetics. It creates a new, highly optimized visual language.
A language for signaling resources.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This meticulously constructed visual reality, it feels so designed down to the last pixel. This isn't just happening by accident.
Oh, absolutely not. It's high-level creative direction. Yeah. And we have to start by defining the specific visual code that's really crystallized across these platforms since late 2025.
Right. It's a very specific look.
It is. They're using these high-definition filters, but they're calibrated to simulate natural light, that sort of soft golden hour glow that just screams warmth and authenticity.
And the backgrounds are never messy.
Never chaotic. They're either these, bucolic, beautiful landscapes or these hyper-organized, almost serenely domestic spaces.
Yeah.
And you have to listen to the audio, too.
Your voice.
The vocal register. It's this calibrated gentleness. It's all designed to suggest low conflict. The whole package is what's being called the digital helpmate visual code.
A hyper-optimized signal of, what, cooperative probability?
That's the term. And this is where the analysis drops this phrase, aesthetic arbitrage, which, that tells you immediately this isn't about sincerity.
No, it's about advantage. It suggests this whole thing is driven by market opportunity, not some kind of, spiritual or political belief.
That is the absolute crux of it. Arbitrage, in finance is profiting from price differences in different markets.
Right.
Well, here, the market is the sexual marketplace. Yeah. And the price difference is the widespread fatigue with the dominant cultural narrative.
So this trend emerges directly from exhaustion. Exhaustion with the way things have been.
Precisely. The sources call this the malignant deflation of deconstruction, which is a really interesting term.
Malignant deflation, that's a heavy economic term. What does that actually mean in the context of, say, the dating market?
Well, think of it like this. For a long time, the main cultural signal for, let's say, high status was about radical individualism, high independence, very low commitment.
The girl boss era, maybe.
Sort of. But the price of those signals it tanked. Everyone was using them, and they ended up signaling high socio-sexual risk, a lot of instability.
So when a market is flooded, the value drops.
The market of low commitment signals collapses. Okay. That's the malignant deflation. And now suddenly the opposite signal, the traditional aesthetic that signals low risk and high cooperation, it becomes disproportionately valuable.
It's a strategically vacant signifier.
It's just waiting to be picked up to maximize your ROI. Your return on investment, whether that's reproductive or resource-based, is just pure economics applied to evolutionary strategy.
Okay, this is where we can really anchor this idea. There's a case study of a woman named Elena, a former marketing executive in London.
Right.
She basically treated her entire life like a product launch. She calls it a full-scale brand recalibration.
And Elena's story is so crucial because it's the cynical insider's view, right? This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated, deliberate strategy. She wasn't just feeling more traditional. She was executing a marketing plan.
A plan that started with purging her social media.
Deliberately. Purging anything that could possibly be interpreted as high conflict or challenging. She was systematically eliminating risk signals.
And the level of detail it's kind of staggering. She studied color theory. The analysis points out she specifically used soft blues and creams.
Because analysts claim those colors are specifically chosen to trigger a sense of calm and safety in the male amygdala.
The part of the brain that processes fear.
It's neuromarketing for dating. It moves way beyond just fashion choices and into biosemiotics, the study of biological signaling.
So by adopting this digital helpmate look, the braided hair, the linen dresses, this aesthetic of strategic naivety, she was doing what?
She was engaging in aesthetic arbitrage, consciously signaling an unthreatening resource-securing persona. She was a safe bet.
So the big question, what was the outcome? Did this brand recalibration actually work?
It worked exactly as the market dynamics would predict. I mean, the shift dramatically changed the type of partner she was attracting.
So?
She moved from the short-term relationships with her peers, other, highly individualistic people, to attracting high net worth individuals. And these men were explicitly looking for low socio-sexual risk.
So for them, her whole appearance, her online persona, it was a signal, a piece of visual hacking.
A very sophisticated high-fidelity signal, yes.
You can see the cold logic at work here. In this framework, her phenotype, her whole outward appearance and behavior, it's just a marketable asset that you optimize for the best possible return.
Precisely. And the analysis is very clear that this strategy is a calculated market-responsive adjustment. It's about optimizing phenotypic quality. And that becomes especially urgent during what they call an economic winter.
A period of insecurity, scarcity.
Right. When high investment partners, people with significant stable resources, become a scarce resource themselves. The strategy is about using the aesthetic to secure that scarce resource.
Okay, so we've established this aesthetic is a meticulously constructed lure driven by market opportunity. But why does a linen dress or a quiet video of baking bread feel like security? To answer that, we have to get into the really irrational part of the brain this whole thing is trying to hack, which moves us perfectly into our next section. Signaling theory, visual hacking, and the deep biological triggers this aesthetic is designed to exploit.
So now we shift from the strategic calculation to the biological mechanism. How does this actually work on the brain? And the whole narrative that's pushed by the womanosphere with all these trad aesthetics, it's essentially a very high-stakes simulation of what's called honest signaling.
The honest signal model.
Yeah.
That's a key idea in evolutionary biology. The signal has to be costly to be believable.
Exactly. If the signal is cheap, everyone can fake it, and then the signal becomes meaningless. So the question is, what is the cost associated with this new aesthetic?
So what are you giving up?
The cost is the willingness to publicly forego certain modern freedoms, to forego these individualistic aspirations. In our hyper-individualized society, the public performance of a return to virtue, a focus on family, that is a potent, costly signal.
Because it's a real sacrifice.
It's perceived as one.
Yeah.
And that willingness to accept the traditional cost advertises two critical things: low socio-sexual risk and a high probability of cooperation. And that's the posture designed to bypass all the skepticism built into the modern mind.
So you're saying the goal isn't to convince the rational part of the brain, the neocortex, that this is a good idea?
Not at all. The goal is to appeal directly to our primal programming.
It's designed to trigger what the sources call parental investment algorithms in potential mates.
Absolutely. The biological system is just. It's wired to look for signals of long-term stability and fidelity. So if this aesthetic can convey extreme commitment and very low risk, it appeals directly to those deep-seated, often subconscious drivers.
Especially in, as they say, alpha provider or beta males who are looking for stability for lineage.
It's a long-term partnership, yes.
And if we go back to that brutally simple logic, the rate cut after the malignant deflation, it really clicks. As the cultural value of freedom has collapsed, the value of commitment has just skyrocketed, purely as a market differentiator.
That's it. For someone seeking a high investment mate, a high freedom signal is now just. It's noise. The aesthetic of virtue becomes a necessary filter, and it just confirms that mating strategies are inherently pluralistic. They're intensely context-dependent.
What works in one era fails completely in the next.
Exactly. It speaks to the chameleon strategy. When the conditions on the ground change, especially souring macroeconomic conditions, housing scarcity, high inflation, the optimal strategy has to change with it.
So the pivot to the Tradwife aesthetic is really a calculated adjustment driven by that scarcity.
It's a pivot away from a short-term attraction-maximizing strategy, the high-freedom era, to a long-term provisioning securing one. The strategy adapts to the environment. The aesthetic is, in a way, a visual representation of seeking refuge from economic uncertainty.
And we can see the raw power of this psychological mechanism in the next case study. This one involves Marcus, a high-achieving tech founder in San Francisco.
Oh.
And he's interesting because he thought he was totally immune to this stuff. He thought he was looking for an organic escape from the chaos of modern dating.
Marcus's story is a deep dive into biosemiotics, the communication of biological information through signs and symbols. He meets this woman, Sophia, whose online presence was a masterclass in this.
The sourdough, the gardening.
All the high-value domestic symbols. The quiet, cooperative demeanor. To his biological algorithms, which were exhausted by the malignant deflation market, she signaled peak cooperative probability. She signaled parental investment and, crucially, low meat-guarding anxiety.
He thought he'd found the real thing, authenticity.
But the reality was that the authenticity was completely engineered.
The spontaneity was an illusion.
A highly curated one. The sources revealed that every so-called spontaneous sun-drenched photo was professionally shot. It was managed, filtered. It was all designed to simulate traditional aesthetic capital, executed with the precision of a major corporate campaign.
Okay, let's get into the weeds on the visual hacking details. What is it specifically about this aesthetic that is so good at bypassing our rational thought?
It's the materials and the settings. That's the key. Soft fabrics, linen, muted colors, these domestic settings, postures of relaxed calm. All of it is engineered to bypass the male neocortical defenses.
The brain's firewall.
Right. The signal is designed to directly stimulate the subcortical or primitive templates, the ones associated with concepts like protected female and untainted lineage. These are deep, deep biological filters. And when they're triggered, they dramatically lower
Of long-term investment.
Exactly. So the performance is designed to reduce the perceived risk of investing your resources in this person. It's not about emotional surrender. It's a transactional optimization.
Which is why the analysis states so bluntly, she displays not submission, but an aesthetic premium packaging designed to exchange for top-tier resources.
That's the core transactional reality of the biological loop, even when it's wrapped in linen and artisanal bread.
And that exchange value, it can be artificially inflated through some pretty sophisticated social media moves, specifically using what are called pre-selection signals.
Oh, this is the genius of the digital marketplace. An influencer can curate this aura of being desired by other high-status men.
Whether it's real or just implied.
Doesn't matter. That perceived status leverages the male competitive instinct. This social proof, it just artificially inflates her market price because it short-circuits rational assessment. The thinking is, if other high-value men are competing for her, her quality must be high.
It's a deeply ancestral selection cue.
Weaponized for the modern global marriage market.
Which brings us to a really fascinating tension. We've established the strategy is calculated, that's the arbitrage, and the mechanism is biological hacking investment algorithms.
Right.
But these biological strategies exist in a world that's governed by human laws. If you're operating with a 19th century aesthetic in a 21st century legal system, something has to break.
It does. And that brings us to the next section, legal contradictions and resource scarcity dynamics.
Because this systemic contradiction, this is maybe the most critical point for anyone watching this trend.
It really is. We are seeing a massive cultural and aesthetic pivot toward this conservative high-commitment signaling. But it exists alongside the stubborn, unyielding persistence of a modern, individualistic legal framework. Yeah. And the risk there is profound.
The risk of misinterpreting mating signals as genuine institutional or legal shifts.
Exactly.
And the third case study, a woman named Chloe, illustrates this perfectly. She went all in on the trad aesthetic, the rural life, the high investment performance. She was trusting that her visual capital would guarantee her long-term security with a wealthy partner.
But when the relationship dissolved, the legal reality hit her like a ton of bricks. She experienced what the analysis calls contractual asymmetry, meaning the performance of a 19th century role, the full-time homemaker, the aesthetic signal of total fidelity. It gave her absolutely no legal shield in a modern courtroom.
Let's slow down and really unpack contractual asymmetry. What exactly did the legal system fail to recognize in her performance?
Well, modern family law, especially after no-fault divorce became the norm, it views both parties as autonomous, rational, and equally capable individuals.
As separate economic units.
Right. It largely ignores the implicit non-monetary obligations. The sacrifice of her career development, the construction of this aesthetic capital, none of that underpinned the legal view of the relationship. The law only recognizes tangible assets, not the promise that was signaled by the aesthetic.
So she signaled a partnership based on a communal, covenantal framework.
But the legal reality was a strictly individualistic, contractual one. Her aesthetic capital was not a recognized, tangible asset in the divorce proceedings. The institutional shift that she was signaling for, a return to a legal system that values homemaking as an economically binding contribution, it just hasn't happened.
It's the ultimate consequence of the move away from older covenantal systems. Those systems were about shared social and spiritual obligations. The modern legal state prioritizes the separation of individual interests.
So the performance of tradition, no matter how convincing it is, cannot rewrite the legal code.
And this legal gap, this vulnerability, it's set against the backdrop of a really powerful psychological driver, the nostalgia drive. Even though the legal system is modern, the desire for that structure and stability is fueling the whole aesthetic.
Nostalgia is an absolute goldmine in marketing. And you're right, the Tradwife aesthetic is basically selling peak comfort food for the soul.
People are drawn to the comfort and simplicity that this aesthetic so powerfully simulates, especially in a chaotic world.
And the studies absolutely confirm this isn't just a theory. Nostalgia-driven campaigns can increase revenue by 3 to 5% per cycle. You see it in consumer behavior like 76% of UK consumers are drawn to sweets that remind them of their childhood.
The milkmaid dresses, the vintage style stuff, it all taps into that same collective yearning for a perceived simpler time.
It does. But we have to anchor this aesthetic yearning in very real, very modern economic pressures. The soft life trend isn't just a fantasy. It's a direct response to shifting gender roles and overwhelming exhaustion.
Let's look at that context.
The data shows that young women in many Western countries, including the UK, are now slightly outpacing young men in employment rates.
So 65.1% of young women are employed versus 64.5% of young men in the UK?
Right, so economic independence is rising. But at the same time, those same women are significantly more likely to be caring for family members, 5.5% of women versus just 1.7% of men.
So the drive for the soft life, or the traditional aesthetic, is the result of women trying to operate in two incompatible systems at once.
They're trying to achieve economic independence while also shouldering a disproportionate care burden. They are exhausted. And the aesthetic signals an escape from that do-it-all paradigm.
Even if the legal reality makes that escape basically impossible.
In this high-pressure environment, it naturally ratchets up competition, which leads us directly into the evolutionary psychology of scarcity and how resource availability influences intersexual competition among women.
So the availability of resources, or just the perception of scarcity, acts as a catalyst for female rivalry.
And it manifests as either self-promotion or rival derogation.
Tearing down the competition.
Exactly. This is a really robust area of research. When women are primed with resource hardship, and that can be financial scarcity, lack of housing, lack of time, lack of energy, it significantly alters their competitive strategies.
How so?
Specifically, women who are already high in what's called dispositional or trait envy show more positive attitudes toward actively derogating their rivals when they feel that scarcity.
So if you're a generally envious person, the fear of scarcity makes you more willing to attack the competition to secure your own spot.
That's the mechanism. But for women who are low in trait envy, their competitive response to scarcity tended to be self-promotion. They compete by making themselves look better, rather than by diminishing a rival.
But the motivation for both is the same.
The underlying motivation for both strategies, derogation, and self-promotion is the same. It's a compensatory response to the threat that resource scarcity poses to your reproductive fitness and your provisioning security. The economic winter creates a psychological pressure cooker.
We've spent a lot of time on the demand side of this market, the strategy, the biology, the scarcity. Now we have to look at the supply side. The massive, highly profitable digital infrastructure that supplies both the aesthetic and the grievance that fuels it. We are talking about the monetized misogyny ecosystem.
And this is where we see the dark, mechanical logic of the internet really at work. Online misogyny isn't just a collection of fringe opinions. It functions as a highly profitable, self-sustaining digital economy.
Centered in the manosphere, framed by red pill rhetoric.
And it leverages hostility for audience capture and for financial gain.
What's truly disturbing, though, is how this ecosystem acts as an ideological funnel. It's not just about, hating women. It's an on-ramp to much broader extremism.
That is its critical function. The ecosystem overlaps significantly with far-right, white supremacist, religious supremacist, and conspiratorial ecosystems. Misogyny creates these emotional entry points.
Grievance, humiliation, a perceived loss of male status.
Feelings that are highly accessible, and they act as a gateway, an on-ramp, that unifies an audience's frustration with broader, often violent ideologies like Christian nationalism or anti-LGBTQ+ hatred.
Let's look at how this politicized gender hostility gets packaged and delivered by some key figures, because the blurring of lines between an aesthetic posture and genuine extremism is very deliberate.
Well, you can consider someone like Caïs Descouffonn in France. Her messaging explicitly fuses anti-feminism with white identitarian politics.
Oh, it's correct.
It creates what's known as feminationalism.
She frames traditional femininity and a high birth rate as a kind of civilizational defense.
A defense against immigration. It's an instrumental use of gender roles for a very exclusionary political agenda.
And we see that in American far-right movements, too. Someone like Nick Fuentes, a prominent far-right Christian nationalist, promotes these incredibly rigid gender hierarchies.
And coordinated harassment. His group launched the 2024 Your Body, My Choice merchandise.
Twisting a progressive slogan.
Exactly. To mock gender parity and mobilize his audience through gender hostility. It shows the clear convergence with ethno-nationalist extremism.
And then, of course, you have the global impact of figures like Andrew Tate.
His content, which is built entirely around male domination and coercive control, led to a documented, measurable rise in misogynistic behavior among boys in schools. It's a direct translation of digital rhetoric into real-world harm.
And other figures do the same. Andrew Anglin, founder of the Daily Stormer, his rhetoric depicts women as deceptive, deserving of domination.
And that often results in these severe specific people.
The core mechanical truth here is that the commercial system itself rewards this behavior. It's monetization via engagement farming.
The digital infrastructure is designed to reward inflammation. Programmatic advertising prioritizes provocative, often hostile content because that content generates rapid, high-volume engagement.
So misogynistic rhetoric becomes a direct, reliable financial incentive for creators.
And even when platforms try to restrict it, the algorithms just direct users off platform to external sites, private communities, where creators retain absolute control over their revenue and their content. The profit motive is perfectly aligned with the outrage cycle.
And this whole exploitation relies on a series of really sophisticated digital tactics. It's a form of digital hacking designed to manipulate attention and profit from outrage.
You start with engagement farming itself. That's just intentionally curating inflammatory content to trigger indignation and counterspeech. The firestorm that results, regardless of its moral outcome, translates directly into higher financial engagement. It makes the creator money.
Then you have the subtlety of mimetic ambiguity, using coded language or dog whistles to embed hate speech in what looks like innocuous imagery.
The goal there is twofold. It offers plausible deniability to the platform moderators, which makes the content really hard to remove. But at the same time, it clearly signals violent or hateful intent to the in-group. It essentially gaslights victims by framing their accurate interpretation of a threat as paranoia.
And that's closely related to irony poisoning, where extreme ideology is delivered under the guise of satire or shitposting.
The key mechanism there is the rhetorical shield. The extremism is only a joke if it faces social sanction. And this constant use of irony and sarcasm gradually lowers the threshold for what's acceptable discourse. It normalizes extreme positions.
And finally, the engine that powers the whole machine, hate rage baiting.
This is content that's engineered specifically to confirm existing misogynistic biases and elicit a visceral fight response. It often involves fabricating or decontextualizing media just to validate the in-group's narratives. It creates a powerful confirmation loop that justifies aggression as a necessary defense.
It's a digital business model built entirely on rage. So it's clear that whether you're looking at the soft domestic aesthetic of the Tradwife or the aggressive rhetoric of the manosphere, both are commercial systems, and both are exploiting evolved psychological mechanisms, attraction on one side, grievance on the other, for exponential profit.
That's a perfect synthesis.
And it leads us into our final, most expansive section. We've covered the marketing, the biology, the legal contradiction, and the monetization. Now we need to step back and ask the ultimate question. What is the deeper macroevolutionary context here? Is this just a sophisticated scam, or are we witnessing a genuine, unconscious civilizational correction?
To even begin to address that, you have to adopt a macroevolutionary view. You have to look at this trend less as a series of individual choices and more as a systemic correction mechanism operating on the long, indifferent arc of history.
This analysis draws a really striking and frankly chilling parallel to the concept of the behavioral sink. This comes from those classic, terrifying rodent utopia experiments.
Yes, the famous Calhoun experiments on mice and rats. They created a perfect habitat, no predators, unlimited food and water, but with increasing social density.
I mean, what resulted wasn't a utopia.
It was profound social pathology. When the population density reached a critical point, the animals started exhibiting these hyper-individualistic, antinatalist, and socially atomized behaviors. A complete breakdown of social roles, infanticide, reproductive failure. The entire population just spiraled toward a reproductive dead end. The sink.
And the parallel being drawn is that hyper-individualistic human societies, ones that are antinatalist and socially atomized, are approaching their own behavioral sink.
That is the contention. And from this very cold, amoral perspective, the womanosphere aesthetic, the focus on family, stability, reproduction, is an emergent, unconscious, self-organizing response.
The social organism trying to save itself.
It's activated to prevent civilizational sterility. It's like the immune system of the species kicking in, trying to signal a return to high fertility, low conflict social structures.
And the sources are very clear about the amoral mechanics at play. Nature does not care about our sentimental feelings.
The mechanical logic is unforgiving. Nature does not care about your traditional sentiments. It only cares whether a signal has flipped the procreation switch. The individual's ethics, their political preferences, they're irrelevant. The survival and reproduction of the group supersedes the ethics of the individual.
This systemic view helps us understand the philosophical void that allows this chaotic oscillation of signals to even happen. The analysis argues that the fundamental flaw lies in the Enlightenment's separation of ethics and epistemology.
Right. So many flaws in modern liberal and realist theories really stem from this radical break. Early classical liberalism originally synthesized ethics and interests, and it drew heavily on the covenantal tradition.
The covenantal tradition. That's rooted in the concept of fetus, a voluntary agreement among individuals to pursue common moral and political objectives, grounded in a shared transcendent understanding.
Yes. And early classical liberals found a way to secularize that, to universalize it, by appealing to natural law. The ethics and the interests were interwoven. But later liberal thinkers, in their quest for this objective, value-neutral rationality, they removed the anchor of natural law.
They narrowed the appeal to interests alone,
which strengthened instrumental reason, but led to the rise of the morally autonomous individual.
And the consequence of creating this morally autonomous individual who is stripped of any transcendent obligation is devastating. The analysis points directly to Nietzsche's last man.
Nietzsche's last man is the creature of modernity, concerned only with maximizing material comforts and security, guided solely by instrumental reason that serves his immediate appetites. He's soulless. He lacks any higher aspiration or moral drive. He just blinks.
This last man is precisely the subject that Max Weber saw being trapped in the iron cage of bureaucratic rationalism that modernity inevitably builds.
Weber's analysis shows that this bureaucratic rationalism, while it's efficient, creates this rigid structure, the iron cage, that locks the individual into a soulless, instrumental existence. And this outcome directly contradicts the standard liberal narrative of progressive freedom.
The more rationalized and efficient society becomes, the less meaning it offers the individual.
And this idea of the individual divorced from a communal moral obligation leads to what the sources call liberalism's moral blindness.
the result of value neutrality.
Exactly. Because modern liberalism refuses to assert a communal or transcendent good, its value neutrality often just masks assertions of pure power. It leads to a reliance on instrumental rationality. It becomes philosophically difficult to justify any value beyond simple subjective preference, and that leaves a moral vacuum.
A vacuum that can be easily exploited by these hyper-optimized signals like aesthetic arbitrage. So, if the modern liberal framework is philosophically exhausted and it's prone to these biological and market hacks, where does the necessary synthesis come from? The analysis posits covenantal thought as a potential alternative.
Covenantal thought offers a path back toward integrating ethics and interests. It's realistic about human fallibility. It has what's called epistemic realism concerning the uses of power. But unlike the fatalistic cultural pessimism you find in some realist theories, it maintains a belief that progress and regeneration in history are possible through voluntary commitment.
And this commitment requires a return to the concept of federal liberty. That's a fascinating older term. What does federal liberty mean here?
It means the freedom to live up to one's moral obligations. It's a concept that recognizes that true freedom isn't just the absence of constraint, but the capacity to bind oneself voluntarily to moral objectives and communal duties.
It's a different way of thinking about freedom entirely.
And the covenantal paradigm offers a theoretical foundation that integrates both the universal, the ethics, and the particular, the communitarian interests. It's a crucial synthesis that was lost in late modern liberal thought, and it could potentially resist the moral blindness that allows the aesthetic hack to flourish.
This has been a deep dive into what might be the most sophisticated camouflage ever deployed in the history of human mating strategies. We've seen that the traditional revival is a sophisticated, market-driven recalibration of mating signals, expertly using evolutionary triggers for resource acquisition.
And we understand the essential irony. This highly effective biological and aesthetic strategy operates entirely within a modern, individualistic legal system that fundamentally does not support the aesthetics pretense. The strategy relies on signaling a social contract that does not legally exist.
The ultimate power, then, lies not in being captured by the beautifully constructed signal, but in recognizing the amoral rules of the game clearly and managing one's own resources, whether emotional, financial, or genetic, with detached strategic precision. The goal is to become impervious to the hack.